Rank number 89, Rader, BTK Killer. The envelope looked ordinary. White, typed address. No return label. Inside was a letter, and something else. A photocopy of a driver's license belonging to a woman who had been murdered months earlier. The letter began with a chilling sentence. This is the BTK Strangler. Police had a new question, not who killed these victims, but something far stranger. Why was the killer writing to them? And how did he seem to know exactly how the investigation was unfolding? A number, a name, an account that cannot be undone. Tonight's entry, rank number 89. 10 confirmed victims, 10 suspected. This is the story behind the number, Rader, the BTK Killer. This is Behind the Veil Truths. Act 1, The First Signs. January 15, 1974. A quiet suburban neighborhood in Wichita, Kansas. A mother and her 3 children were found murdered inside their home. They had been bound, strangled. The crime scene was chaotic but deliberate. Investigators quickly realized something disturbing. The killer had taken his time. There were signs of planning. The victims were members of the Otero family, Joseph, Julie, and their 2 children. But one question haunted detectives almost immediately. Why this family? And how had the killer entered the house so confidently? There was no forced entry. Had the victims opened the door willingly? Or had the killer convinced them he belonged there? Act 2, the pattern emerges. Months passed. Then another murder. And another. Each victim had been bound. Each had been strangled. The killer later explained the meaning behind the 3 letters he would become known for. BTK. Bind. Torture. Kill. But police did not invent that name. The killer did. In 1974, a letter arrived at the Wichita Eagle newspaper. Inside was a confession to the Otero murders. The writer demanded recognition. He wanted a name, a symbol, a legacy. He signed the letter. The chilling implication became clear. This killer wasn't hiding. He was communicating. But another question emerged. Why would someone risking exposure contact the police and media? Was it arrogance? Or something deeper? Act 3, Investigation and Mistakes. The BTK Killer taunted investigators for years. He sent letters, drawings, even detailed descriptions of crime scenes. Sometimes he included photographs. He seemed to know exactly what investigators had found and what they hadn't. And yet police could not identify him. The murders continued through the late 1970s and early 1980s. Then suddenly, silence. The BTK Killer vanished. Years passed. Then decades. Many believed he had died, or moved away, or simply stopped. But in 2004, 30 years after the first murders, a package appeared at a Wichita news station. Inside were photographs tied to one of the killings. BTK had returned. Why now? What had triggered the killer to reappear after 3 decades of silence? If you follow stories that uncover the hidden psychology behind crimes like this, consider subscribing to Behind the Veil Truths, because the final chapter of the BTK case would reveal something few people expected. Act 4, The Discovery. The renewed communication became a mistake. BTK had always believed he was smarter than investigators. In one message, he asked police a question. If he sent information on a floppy disk, could it be traced? Police replied publicly, no, it could not, but it was a lie. Weeks later, a floppy disk arrived. Investigators examined the file metadata, and suddenly a name appeared. Rader. The disk had been created at a church computer, the church where Rader served as president of the Congregation Council. The pieces began falling into place. Rader was a compliance officer for the city, a church leader, a husband, a father. For decades, he had lived quietly inside the community he terrorized. How had no one noticed? Act 5, Arrest, Trial, Aftermath. In February 2005, police arrested Rader. When confronted with the evidence, he confessed. Methodically, without visible emotion, he described each crime, each victim, each moment of control. The calmness of his descriptions shocked investigators and families alike. In court, Rader pleaded guilty to 10 murders. He was sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences in prison. Today, Rader remains incarcerated in Kansas. But the BTK case left behind a chilling lesson. For more than 30 years, a man who bound and murdered strangers lived quietly among neighbors. He attended church, held a steady job, raised a family, and no one suspected the truth. Before we continue, if you appreciate deep investigative storytelling into cases like this, subscribing to Behind the Veil Truths helps the series continue uncovering these stories. Because the deeper this countdown goes, the darker the patterns become. 10 confirmed, 10 lives stolen. Rank 89 is behind us, but the descent continues. Because the next case on this list reveals something even darker. This is Behind the Veil Truths. And we're getting closer to number 1. Next episode, the number changes again. But the killer behind it didn't send letters. He hunted victims along a dark highway and left bodies where drivers would never look.